Welcome to Open AGI Forum. We are recording from Cosim Hangzhou 2025, and we are sitting at Hangzhou, China. So we are honored to have Johann Diedrick here today. And please have a brief introduction of yourself first.
Sure. My name is Johann Diedrick. I'm a staff engineer and data scientist at the Mozilla Foundation. I work on the Mozilla Data Collective. The Mozilla Data Collective is a platform that allows people to create, curate, and control their data sets. Our mission is to redefine the AI data ecosystem with communities at its center.
Yeah. You work with the Mozilla data, but you introduce yourself as an artist and engineer in the website. Can you describe or explain you are the real artist or this saying?
Yeah, I think, my past experience, I would say, two careers, both as an artist and both as an engineer. At Mozilla, I actually was introduced to Mozilla as an artist. So in 2021, I was a Mozilla Creative Media Award recipient for a project that was using some of Mozilla's common voice data sets. I wanted to explore some of the bias within data sets, and I was given the opportunity to pursue that work through the Mozilla Creative Award program. Now, almost 4 years later, I'm working at Mozilla Foundation as an engineer. So it's a really interesting journey, starting as an artist, but then now coming there as an engineer.
So was there a specific moment that you realized the tools of engineering were better suited for asking questions than for just providing solutions?
It's a great question. I think growing up, I was always surrounded by technology. I'm a digital native. I grew up on the internet. And so I always use technology and engineering as a way to explore the world around me, as a way to ask questions of the world. I was always interested in audio and sound, but also electronics and programming. So I would use those engineering skills as a way to explore my curiosity within audio and sound. That led me to exploring further things like audio AI and audio recognition tasks like acoustic scene classification. But then eventually I got more interested in voice and speech, and that sort of naturally led me towards the Mozilla Foundation, which was doing a lot of really interesting work with speech data.
Yeah. So how does the mindset of the system architecture, thinking about scale, efficiency, and infra, so inform your work as an artist? So when design an art like dark matters, so are you secretly debugging society?
No, actually, that's a great point, I think. Yeah, I think for me, when I approach some of the creative work that I make, some of the artworks that I make, what I like to do is I like to rapid prototype. So we talk about rapid prototyping in engineering, where you just want to get the quickest and simplest version of an idea out there to kind of prove the concept and to make sure that it actually is sound and is viable. And then we iterate on that idea. So even as an artist, I like to just make a very simple prototype first to explore the idea and see what's available, and then I iterate and build and scale it up after proving the first kind of version of it.
So people always saying the AI is becoming like water, air, and electricity now, right? So your personal website speaks of defamiliarizing the familiar. So technology, especially voice assistants, has become deeply familiar in our daily lives.
Yeah.
So is your goal to make us feel a bit more uncomfortable with the technology we have readily welcomed into our homes?
I think so, yeah. I think right now voice AI is going to become the next big interface for interacting with machines and computers. And I think it's going to happen in a way that feels like air or feels like water, in the sense that it'll be very invisible to us, but all of a sudden it'll be around us all the time without us maybe being quite aware that that transition has happened. And so the work that I like to make is about highlighting and spotlighting the nature of that technological system that we're moving into, but also critiquing it and giving people a better awareness of how it actually works, how does it function, where does it fail, how can we improve it, etc.
So many senior engineers eventually transition from pure coding to addressing system or architecture problems. So your journey seems like a powerful extension of this. So did you reach a point where you felt that the most critical bugs were not in the code itself, but in the core assumption and values of the system we built?
Yeah, I think as an engineer, I love being in the code. I love finding the bugs. I love, solving complex problems and making elegant solutions. But I also think being able to think about the problem at a higher level when it comes to the product, like who are we making this for? What are some of the system and architectural decisions we should make that really holistically address the thing that we're trying to solve? It's not always just about finding the most efficient algorithm. Sometimes simplifying the system or making sure that the components are sustainable, or that the thing that we're actually building is doing what we think it is for the end users. Those are the kind of questions that I'm really interested in answering.
Yeah. So the art is not stable, and the code is stable. So nowadays appears the vibe coding is become a chaos. So how do you see the AI coding and the vibe coding in this unstable
Yeah,
generative? Yeah.
maybe I think I was a little early when it came to vibe coding. I was using Claude Sonnet 3.5, was integrated into Cursor,
Yeah.
and really just dove into it and was just sort of like, let me just try make, because I think the great thing about AI coding assistance is that you can really quickly get from an idea to implementation without having to invest too much time. But I remember the first experiences with that, you would get into these really chaotic loops where the AI assistant would help you try to solve one thing, but it would introduce three more bugs. And then it would try to solve those three bugs, and that would introduce eight more bugs. And then by the time you're trying to solve the thing you started with, you're now trying to solve 10 new things, and your whole code base is now chaotic and you can't understand it. So I think what's been interesting is learning how to use these tools. And so I think for me, some to help me is always have a very specific task in mind and only try to complete that one task. And very, very simple. It can just be adding a new parameter to a function, or even updating documentation. Don't try to ask the AI assistant to make the entire system at once. I think that's a little too hard, and can lead down these very crazy, chaotic loops. Always use Git. Every time you get
Yeah.
something working, make a commit. You save your state, I think, even more than you probably thought like you needed to. I think, you can code, and then when you're thinking about making your commit, you can bring in just like isolated bits and pieces. But I think really retraining yourself to think about saving the state of your code base before you ask the AI assistant to do something next really helps make it actually effective in helping you solve your problems.
See. So spend time at the Recurse Center, so a place known of helping programmers recharge and explore new frontiers. So for the developers in our audience, could you share how the experience helped you shift your focus from writing code to revealing the impact of code?
It's a great question. I love the Recurse Center. I've spent a lot of time there. I've done a number of batches at the Recurse Center, and it's a beautiful place for me, reconnecting with your passion for coding, I think, but also being in a community of other programmers who are also incredibly curious, incredibly intelligent, incredibly collaborative, I think. And so I think if you spend a lot of time in code, so yeah, you kind of want to take a little step back and take a retreat and kind of reevaluate what it even means to program. Where is the joy that you get from programming? And also, if you feel like you're stagnating, how do you push yourself? The Recurse Center has a lot of these, they call them self-directives. They're not rules necessarily, but they're sort of guidelines to help you challenge yourself and make sure that you're being activated and engaged. And the one that I really love is called Working at the Edge of Your Abilities. So it's always about figuring out where you are currently, and then what's just one little step further that makes you feel a little uncomfortable. Work there. Work in that space that's just a little bit more uncomfortable, maybe you don't know enough, maybe you're intimidated. But once you find that space and you're working there, that's how you start to grow as a programmer.
Engineers are trying to make complex problems into manageable parts, and it seems you have applied your skills to social issues. You just mentioned the algorithmic bias. We look at the problem like algorithm bias to see it as a technical challenge, a social one, or a complex interaction that requires a new kind of API between tech and the society.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think that technology is embedded with people and people make technology. And so when we are writing code and building complex systems, we are taking our everyday worldview and our assumptions and our biases and embedding that into these systems. And I don't think engineers take enough time to think about what am I implicitly and involuntarily adding into this system that I take for granted as truth or an assumption, but actually maybe isn't universal for all people. And I think thinking about these considerations will help us to make technology that works better for all people.
Would you like any engineer principle you have found surprisingly useful when thinking about society and ethical issues in technologies, like scalability or graceful degradation?
Yeah, I think always trying to connect with the people that you're building the technology for, I think is probably one of the big things. And I think that lesson is maybe not so much practiced in engineering, but definitely in product. There's a lot of commitment to making sure that the end user or the people that we are building technology for, we actually understand who they are and what their hopes are, what their dreams are, what their pains are, what makes them happy. I think all of these things should be really understood by engineers before they even start writing any code. Really understand what it is you're building this for, why it's important for people, how is it going to help them, how can we make sure it doesn't harm them. I think having those considerations will help make technology that isn't as biased as it currently may be.
Yeah. So let's discuss the bias in voice AI. Can you explain how work has explored how these systems can system fail for certain communities?
Yeah, absolutely. So my introduction to Mozilla actually was through this project called Dark Matters, which was about spotlighting the absence of African American speech in speech data sets that are used to train commercial voice interface devices like Alexa, Google Home, Siri, and etc. And the bias that it produced marginalized people from using these devices because they thought to themselves, it can't understand me, it can't hear me, it doesn't know how I speak, and therefore it never works properly, and then I actually don't want to use this device anymore. And I think in an ideal world, we would have technology that works for as many voices as possible, so that people can feel included and so people can benefit from the advantages that technology can bring for us, the conveniences, the helpfulness of it all. So that work was strictly just about, you know, spending time highlighting the bias in these sorts of data sets. And I think in, the technology we have now, AI was trained with data, and we can talk about algorithmic bias or bias in AI as being a data set problem. And so perhaps maybe we just need more data or better data or more inclusive data. And there's pros and cons to that debate, I would say. But for the past 2 years, I've been going a little deeper into thinking about where algorithmic bias comes from. So for the past 2 years before Mozilla, I was a Just Tech Fellow at the Social Science Research Council, where I was exploring the origins of algorithmic bias in speech AI. And it's a really incredible story, actually. It goes all the way back to the early 19th century. Before electronics, before computing, we were actually already trying to teach people how to speak using images and essentially showing people how they should move their mouths in a certain way. Should you move your tongue? How should you move your teeth? How should you use your throat, and etc. those ideas then became embedded in the speech technology that we started to develop in the 20th century. A lot of this was with Alexander Graham Bell and Bell Labs in New Jersey in the United States. Um, and at Bell Labs is where we discovered the first recognition technology. It's a system called Audrey. It stands for Automatic Digit Recognizer. And Audrey was a very, very simple system. I mean, very advanced at the time, but I think looking back, relatively simple. It was essentially a system that allowed you to speak to it. It only worked for one person, and it was about recognizing digits, so the numbers 0 through 9. So we have a similar kind of classic problem in machine learning with recognizing handwritten digits called MNISC. But for speech, this was done many decades prior in this system called Audrey. And in that system, also, we have kind of first instances of algorithmic bias where the system wants to generalize and reduce as much variance as possible in order to understand the essential information transmission qualities contained within speech. And so what you have essentially is a system that is starting to assume what speech should be, assume what speech should sound like, and therefore anything that deviates away from that normalized, standardized speech becomes less recognizable by those systems. And that idea and some of the algorithms within that gets carried along with us from the 1940s and 50s up through today. We have systems now that are biased, not just because of the data, but also because of the algorithms embedded in it. And this goes all the way back for over close to 100 years or so
Um,
in the within the idea of speech recognition.
from data science standpoint, is it just simply a code star problem that more data can fix, or is it a more fundamental design flow in how we define a standard or average user?
Absolutely. I think that's exactly it. Yeah, it's not just data. It is flow of information. How are we normalizing the data? How are we reducing variance? All the kind of things that we do in software systems to make it more efficient, to make it less complex, to make it simpler, to make it work for most use cases. All of those, I think, add up to systems that work well for, let's say, 90% of people, or 95% of people, or 99% of people. But I think there's this idea of the law of big numbers, right? So if something works well for 99% of people and you have 100 people, okay, only one person is being served well. But if you have 99% for 100 million people or a billion people, now you have millions of people that the thing isn't working as well for. And I think we have to kind of, consider what it means to evaluate systems that work, that look like they work really well at a percentage level, and then we take it back into populations that are so large. The little 1% or 0.1% really means a lot in that way.
Yeah. So at Mozilla, you have been involved with the Common Voice project, which aims to solve the data diversity problem by collecting a massive public data sets. So people is always worrying the work seems to question if data collection itself can be extractive. So like, for example, like last year, I think springtime, the Open AI have released the GPT-4o. The voice AI in that show is still really impressive. Yeah, the woman, yeah, really, really until now. But after that, the Scarlett Johansson, the movie star, said, Open AI have still her voice and becomes, yeah. So but some of your, how do you as a leader ensure that the process of gathering data is ethical and empowering, not just a means to the end?
I think it's a really great question. So with Common Voice, it really starts with communities, and Common Voice wouldn't be what it is today if it wasn't for communities and the people within the communities consenting into including their voice or donating their voice into these data sets. So because I can say with a lot of confidence that there isn't any kind of extractive process within the Common Voice. We're not scraping, speech data from videos or social media websites. Everything is voluntarily contributed by people in the community. And within each community, you would have like a community advocate, let's say, not a leader, but someone who is kind of there on the behalf and stewarding their community members. And everything is done in a consensual way. Everyone sort of agrees and understands what it means to contribute their voice. We have also different procedures for removing your voice from the data sets as well. So if you find out a year later you actually don't want your voice in there anymore, you can get it removed. So there's definitely a lot of different practices and processes that we have in order to make sure that growing these data sets and scaling them is done in a way that feels.
So we often talk about the data quality. So your work suggests we should also talk about data humanity. So the context, emotion, and the power dynamics embedded in data. So what are the risks of treating voice data as just another abstract signal to be processed like server log?
Yeah, that's a really profound question, I think. I think voice isn't just data. It isn't just raw material for building AI systems. Voice really is wedded and tied to identity. It's tied to culture. It's tied to history. It's tied to, sociality, the way that we connect with each other. There's a lot of very deep context around speech and voice that I think can get lost if we just think of it as signal, or if we just think of it as, bits and bytes and things like that. Um, and I think making sure to include that context within the data set is something that we think a lot about. And so there's this concept of data sheets. And as we are rolling out this new platform, the Mozilla Data Collective, we are including data sheets along with the data sets. And the data sheets, you can think of them in the same way that we have data sheets for electronics components, which basically explain, you know, how does it work? How can you use it? What are the different ways that it functions? With the data sheets for data sets, what it does is it explains to you how was it collected, what are some of the characteristics of the data set, um, what were some of the pre-processing techniques used for it, how do we clean it up, what use cases do we think are appropriate for using this, what's not included, what are some of the biases that are possibly inside of the data set. Um, and there's really, I think, important and interesting context around the data set that I think makes it so you kind of understand the richness of it all.
See. So an open dataset, like an open source project, is vulnerable to certain biases in its contributors. So how can project like Common Voice actively encourage contributions from underrepresented groups without being tokenized? So what are the practical challenges?
I think for me, the way that I think about this problem is how do we incentivize people, I think, right? I think that's sort of the question. How do we incentivize people to contribute to these data sets? What do they get out of it, you know?
Uh,
Um, I think in one case, you can think of it as cultural preservation and stewardship. So in the same way that you go to an art museum and you see cultural artifacts, one of the important roles, I think, of art museums, for example, is that they take care of these artifacts. They make sure that it's preserved. They make sure that it's, restored if it needs to be, etc. So there's a lot of investment put into making sure that these artifacts stand the test of time. The other point is that I think demonstrating to the contributors to these data sets that it's so valuable that they contribute to it because it really impacts the technology that's made with it. So that you can say, because of your contribution to Common Voice, now Alexa or Siri or Google Home or some other device can understand your language. Before it couldn't, but thanks to you, now it can. And so demonstrating that your contribution can help make technology actually more inclusive or less harmful, more beneficial, I think helps to make people feel like, oh, I can make a difference. I can actually, change the way in which technology works and functions in the real world at scale.
Your work with environment sounds so raise a fascinating point about what data we choose to collect. So in our focus on human-generated data, are we creating a massive blind spot by ignoring the data from our nature existence?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think I spent a lot of time in the environmental sound and classification space, and so I actually came from that space into voice. So I have a lot to maybe say or think about when it comes to environmental sound and the way in which that pay attention to the world around you through um, the sound environment can really give us a deeper, richer understanding of our world in general. So I definitely think that they're related. I think they are kind of distinct. I don't think that they have a lot of necessarily overlaps between the concerns and considerations, but I think that they are obviously very linked in just the way that they're sound and audio. I think, yeah, speech and voice for the most part is about communication and information exchange, I would say. There's also stuff like you said about like intonation and emotion and things like that. Whereas I think environmental sound has a lot more to do with the world that we're building and the way that it's transforming and changing over time when it comes to like industry or climate or industrialization. I think we can talk about some of those concerns when we are analyzing environmental sounds.
I see. Just also really interesting. Ignore the blind point is what is the role of silence in data. So in your voice data says, does the space between words or the decision not to speak carry information that our models are currently ignoring?
Yeah, it does. I'm trying to think of this one example. There was a year or so ago with a mobile app for ChatGPT. If you use your microphone and just sent it silence, it responded, I think, thank you for watching. Some kind of
Yeah.
it was some kind of response that you would only get if you had seen or got to the end of a video. And it was a really interesting glitch or a really interesting hack, I guess you would say, that revealed how it was trained. So silence in the context of training only occurs at the end of videos or at the end of audio content. And so that is, I think, like a really revealing use case of what is how are we representing silence or how are we not representing silence inside of the models that we're training? Yeah. Um, yeah, silence is, I think, a very important, how can I say it? It's a very important unit of expression that holds so much while being so empty. And I think it only really makes a lot of sense in context when you're in communication with other people. Why was there that silence? What does that silence mean? We have a phrase in English, a pregnant silence, a silence that contains so much, but is obviously hidden and we can't really see it directly. So, yeah, I think that silence and the meaning around silence is probably going to be a really interesting challenge to solve inside of AI because it's not very explicit what silence means. It's very contextual.
So the concept of listening is central to your work. So how does this translate into your design process? So do you practice a form of deep listening or to the community or the problem space before you even start building?
Great. It doesn't really show up as much in the engineering work that I do. So I think, listening in the context of engineering really shows up in, gathering requirements for the work that I'm doing. So understanding, what is it we're building? I like to just talk to lots of people and do a lot of listening in that way. And then once we deliver a feature or deliver a product, we then listen to the communities and try to understand from them, what should we do next? What's working, what's not working, etc. So I think listening is more of a practice of making sure that the thing that we're building is actually impacting the end user or the communities in the way that we intend, but also that they intend as well.
So you are both a builder of the data infra and a critic of its society impact.
Yeah.
So does this give you a sense of your responsibility? So how do you manage the potential conflicts between these two roles in your day-to-day work?
I think that is the challenge. That's the daily challenge. The daily challenge is, on one hand, I spend a lot of time researching and thinking about the societal impacts of technology And I think that motivated me to become an engineer and to work on the problems that I work on because I think that they're so important and they're so profound. They have so much impact at scale that I would like to think of myself as someone who really can make a difference because I'm actually thinking about some of these considerations. And yeah, there are definitely trade-offs and there are definitely times where working on a team and working on a product and working for a company, you end up making decisions that you maybe wish you could have done the other version of it. And so you're always, in that context and in the situation, you can't always get what you want, or maybe the thing that you want has to happen later, years later, maybe perhaps. So it's a long challenge, but I'm really excited to be in the middle of it.
So this is not conflict, is how do you document your work? So in open source, documentation is key of adoption. So how do you document an interactive experience so that is a lesson can be learned by people who can't experience it firsthand?
So I think, yeah, documentation is obviously very important, especially for open source and open data. And I think we strive to bridge the gap from the technical to the non-technical. By that I mean is we understand that a lot of people who are going to come in contact with our products might not have a technical background, but it's still very important for them to understand how it works and how it functions. So we do a lot. We have definitely people on our team that are writing a lot and making documentation that's accessible for everyone. For me, I think actually, I don't know if this is what you would consider documentation, but I think demonstration or demos is a way to document how this thing actually functions and works. And open source is a great approach to this because you can just show people, this is the code, this is how this function works, this is how this model works, this is where the data is coming from, and people can really transparently see. Um, I think almost like, open source can be thought of documentation of a transparent system. So the transparency of open source is a way to document how systems work.
What is the most hopeful and concrete example you have seen of open data being used to empower, like, yeah, marginalized community?
It's a really challenging one because I don't think that there are a lot of great examples of this. I think in the US context, um, there was a lot of data around the impact of COVID on marginalized communities. And I think a lot of people did a lot of work to collect and share this data as a way to really highlight the way in which marginalized communities were disproportionately impacted by COVID, for example. I also think things like police brutality and the police state in the United States was openly documented, and data around that was collected in a way so that people could understand the impacts of those systems on marginalized communities as well. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done around collecting data for or from these communities. I think a lot of these communities have a lot of skepticism around data collection because data collection can also be a way to surveil communities as well. And so I think a lot of communities recognize that, the idea of data collection as a way to maybe benefit us also has nefarious side where it can also be a way to surveil these communities as well.
So from your perspective, what does trustworthy AI sound like?
I think trustworthy AI definitely starts with transparency. So I think, transparency is maybe another way to talk about honesty. And if I want to be honest with you, I will show you everything that you are asking for. I'll reveal all the things that should convince you to believe me when I say something that's true. And so you get to evaluate whether or not I'm trustworthy by the fact of me exposing all of the code and the data and the inference and model outputs that I produce. The community can go and evaluate it, and they can say for themselves, "Yeah, I believe you." I think you shouldn't trust anyone implicitly. You shouldn't trust anything just because they say trust me. you should be able to evaluate it yourself and be like, okay, I trust this now.
So the future of AI is often depicted as either a utopia of efficiency or a dystopia of control. So your work suggests like a third path. AI is a mirror, forcing us to confront our own biases. So is this the most real and valuable role for AI in our society?
Which one?
The third path. Yeah, AI as the mirror to confront our own biases.
I think, I think right now, unfortunately, I think people take AI output as truth. I think there's not enough education or advocacy around the fact that what is generated from the popular AI these days, LLMs, text-based LLMs are assumed to be truth, and I think a lot of people don't even understand the concept of like hallucinations, or the fact that the data that is used to train is sort of biased. I think people already think that what they're using is super intelligent or like an oracle that knows everything and can predict the future. So I think that the mirror is there, and I think people are seeing something from these outputs and believing it to be truth about reality. And I think that there's still a lot of work to do to educate people that, don't don't trust this on blind faith, because it isn't a completely accurate reflection of the world around you. It's one very narrow representation of the world.
So looking at the future of open data, what is the biggest opportunity you see, and what is the biggest threat that keeps you up at night?
One of the biggest opportunities, I think, is providing ways for communities to self-determine how their data is being used. I think right now we're in a situation where, there's maybe three possibilities for people. Either you put your data on the open web and it gets scraped and it then is used in ways that are without your consent and potentially harmful. The other option is to sign an exclusive deal with a mega corporation or a big tech company, which gets your data out there, but it's very much within one system, and it really kind of stifles innovation. And then the other option is to just remove your data entirely from the open web, but then you risk not being in the conversation when it comes to technological innovation. So I think one of the really exciting opportunities for us is to build a platform that allows people to share their data, retain ownership of that data, and control access to it. I also think that that is kind of flipping the script around the data economy, where people can start to receive compensation for their data. I think currently we have a lot of software systems that are based on advertising, and so like you get to use it for free, but you are the product to advertisers. And so many people are making a lot of money from your data, but you are not making anything from it as well. And so we want to, build a system and build a platform that shifts that power imbalance so that people can actually, be fairly compensated if they'd like to for their data. I think one of the threats are bad actors who eventually get access to your data and then are able to just kind of use it in ways that you didn't intend for. And, if that happens, it's very hard to pull that back. It's like when you mix a drink, you can't pull the elements back out of the drink. It's already mixed into that system. And I think that's still a very unsolved problem when it comes to how do you identify when data has been used in ways that you don't intend it to be. How do you pull that back? It's a really hard thing, I think, to solve.
So in the day one, you have attended the Open for UN SDGs conference. So the theme of your panel is using open data to speed up those progress on the UN SDGs. So your work, however, often highlights the dangers of moving too fast with flawed data. So what's the right balance between speed and the responsibility?
Mozilla Foundation and the Mozilla Data Collective errs on the side of responsibility. We err on the side of safety, we err on the side of community rights and self-determination. I don't think it's responsibility or innovation. I think it's definitely a spectrum. And I think there are a lot of very powerful players that are strictly on the innovation side with no responsibility. And so I think we're trying to balance that equation, so to speak, by being overly committed to responsibility, let's say. I think that's a great thing. I think we should be doing that. A phrase that I like to use sometime is moving at the speed of community. And so it's going to be a little slower actually. It will require um, more consideration, more contemplation, more thoughtfulness, um, as opposed to just moving fast and breaking things. We don't want to break, moving fast and breaking things is okay for a website, but moving fast and breaking things is not okay for society. We don't want to break society for the sake of innovation. So I think moving at the speed of community is a really nice way to think about how do we maintain technological advancements moving forward while also being responsible to the communities that we.
So the last question is the term AI for good is very popular now. So work suggests we should also focus on AI for truth, the using AI to reveal uncomfortable truths about our society. So do you think the tech industry is ready for this kind of introspection?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's not going to be tech that does it. I don't think it's going to be the big tech companies that do it because I don't think they're incentivized to. I don't think it helps them necessarily. I think there's maybe like an idea of capital T truth, a universal truth, and then I think that there are many truths, and I think where we may end up is kind of a diversity and a proliferation of different kind of AI systems that are representative of different truths. For example, Chinese AI might be built around a certain kind of system of truth, and US-based AI systems will be built around different systems of truth, and we'll have all these different kind of AIs around the world that are fundamentally based on different truths that are reflective of the societies and cultures that they're made from. I don't know if that's the best way forward either, but I do think that giving people the opportunity to build AI systems that work for them and that they get to self-determine and decide how it should benefit them that ultimately reflects their truth is a place to start. I do worry though that that could also mean that we end up in the situation of filter bubbles where I have my truth, you have your truth, and we don't really talk to each other or we don't really understand each other. We just stay kind of separate but isolated and separate but not connected. And I think that there needs to be some way to connect each other and have the kind of cultural exchange that we're having right now or that I'm having with people at the conference. So I think I don't know, that's maybe the history of humans. It's kind of like everyone has their truths. Sometimes we get conflict, sometimes we can have peace together, sometimes we can find mutual exchange. I think being curious about other truths is also something. So even coming to this conference in Hangzhou, I did a lot of reading and listening to people talking about the current state of China and technology and AI right now, because I wanted to understand the truths here in China and what context, what historical and cultural context is making such a vibrant technology scene in Hangzhou and in China, which is very different, but similar, but again, different in its own ways to what's happening in the United States as well.
So thanks for your time. That's all the questions.
Yeah,
Please,
thank you.
please, our audience subscribes our Gosim Foundation official channel and the Open AGI Forum.